We are live today. I got all your emails and I got all your phone calls. You know, a lot of you been calling me on the phone saying, we like the fact that you're interviewing Christians these days, but most of these Christians are total dumbos. Can you get like a philosophically minded Christian, someone who's like halfway intelligent? So I found the newest flavor in YouTube Christianity, someone highly recommended by Capturing Christianity. That's how I heard about him, actually. It was in a little stream, and I saw him on Pine Creek recently, like, what was that, 2 days ago, I think it was. And here today for your viewing pleasure, the Maverick Christian. Wow, oh my God, I'm freaking out. Oh!
Hello, I am the halfway intelligent Christian.
The Maverick Christian. Why Maverick? Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, just like, it sounds cool.
Yeah, it Maverick. Does. I was like, wow, that guy's got to be a badass Christian.
Yeah, I'm also like, I try to think more independently. So, like I mentioned on Pine Creek, for example, I don't accept biblical inerrancy.
Right. Well, that puts you in a Maverick place in some areas, but in YouTube, I think you'll find about half the Christians you interact with will probably be with you. I don't know if you know John and Laura or Spartan Theology. You'll probably know them at some point. But
yeah, they ring a bell.
So tell us about who you are and what you're doing and how long you've been. This the first time I heard of you was Friday. And I did hear of you from Capturing Christianity. It popped up on my YouTube notifications. And then somehow, I guess you read the comment, and that's how we started chatting. So I hadn't heard of you before. Have you been doing this for a while on YouTube?
Let's see. I've been on YouTube since 2012. I've been like only sporadically participating. So I'm trying to up my game a little bit. So I had another video out. So I'm from Minnesota. I'm a philosophy student. My first paper published is the Eternal Society Paradox. Which earned me an interview with Classical Theism podcast. So that was cool. Yeah, in a couple of months, I got the Straw Man and Irrationality video. That was the most recent one. And Capturing Christianity recommended that to a lot of people. I'm grateful for his help. I'll probably have to do a thank you video sometime on that.
Yeah, totally. He spiked the views on that. It got something like 3,000 views. I like that video. We'll talk about that in a minute. That was like dealing with Rachel Oates. Have you interacted with her at all?
Not personally. I did kind of bring her up in a vlog episode before that where I talked about red herring maneuvers. So in that same video, in that same Rachel Oates video, she responded to Cameron's questions and our arguments video. It's like, this would be a good one to analyze some red herrings. Right. So I did that first.
Right. She responded to the. I totally get where he's coming from with the questions are not arguments. I think that's a really valid, legitimate point. And you say, what do you think?
I think, yeah, that's a good point. So questions aren't arguments, but they can sometimes feel like arguments. And so you have to remember to think logically. And I agree. With Rachel Oates' videos, one of the things I pointed out when I showed Rachel Oates do responses that sometimes it's possible to give the illusion of a substantive argument or a substantive rebuttal without there actually being one. And so that's what I kind of put out. Rachel. Yeah. Same thing with
surprised me coming into this because I started doing this because I started watching a lot of atheist YouTubers. And there were a lot of questions that got asked. And I assumed that those questions were in good faith. And I was like, that can be answered. And I got what I think is a reasonable answer to that. And I didn't realize that they were going to be presenting them. It wasn't just going to be that simple. Well,
they might actually be being presented in good faith, but maybe they are just not aware that they might inadvertently be giving.
What's that?
I think they might be presenting it in good faith, but they also might, inadvertently not realizing they might be giving the illusion of a substantive argument where none exists. I think that happened with Rachel Oates when she gave some of her responses.
Right. It's definitely. I was surprised that it was a prelude to it wasn't it's not that the question is in good faith. It's like they didn't really want an answer. The answer was a springboard to an argument or a / debate. It wasn't like, oh, okay, I can think about that. That settles it. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I said that all that clearly.
I think that might happen in some cases. Like many things, you have to take it on a case-by-case basis.
Right. Well, the first time I ran into contact with it was there was this girl I was friends with on Twitter who's an atheist. And I liked her a lot. We got along. And then she just sort of mentioned something about the problem of evil. And I said something. I thought this was a conversation. And she was like, oh, my God, so much. And she starts going, the flood, the genocide. And I was like, what on earth? Like, what is all this? Like, she had this whole series of like, I don't know, it was really weird. It was like you poked this series of objections that were, I come to find out in the time since that those are standard issue atheist talking points. But I'd never experienced them before. So I was like, what? You know what I mean? Are you there? Can you hear me? Uh-oh.
I put it on mute. Sorry.
Oh. So do you know what I mean with that?
I'm not sure if I've experienced quite like that myself. It's been a while since I've had that sort of interaction with atheists, but atheists come in all sorts of flavors. Some are relatively reasonable. Some have a substantive conversation, and some less so.
Right. So what's the genesis of your channel, and what happened? Have you been a Christian the whole time?
Yeah. Kind of grew up in a Christian home. Kind of high school, I started questioning my faith, having doubts, and I tried to sort of reason my way back here, and I'm still Christian, still a theist, and I kind of got interested in philosophy and apologetics, but mostly I'm more interested in the atheism versus theism stuff because, like I kind of mentioned in my first vlog episodes, I sometimes debate with atheists just to see how they think, because I can understand how someone could be not a Christian. I think denying the resurrection is at least rationally defensible, right. But atheism was a whole different ball of wax. It's like, I don't see how one could be an atheist once all the evidence is considered, because by my lights, at least, the evidence against atheists seems pretty strong. You could become an atheist, but it seems like you'd have to bite some pretty big bullets. So I sometimes...
what bullets in particular would you be thinking of?
All right, well, it's like, if I were an atheist, I wouldn't accept that morality is real. For example, I would be a moral nihilist. So, if I were an atheist, I'd be like, nothing is morally wrong, not even torturing if it's just for fun. But on the other hand, it's not reasonable to believe that there's nothing morally wrong with torturing if it's just for fun. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm an atheist, because it seems to lead to views that I think are implausible.
Right. Yeah, I noticed your argument is kind of similar to your morality argument is kind of similar to the classic William Lane Craig one. But it's actually a little bit more subtle. We can go into that in a minute, but first I want to find out about so you were raised Christian. What type of Christian would you define yourself as?
I originally went to a Lutheran church.
Right.
So how Lutheran, I guess.
Were you really heavy duty Christian? Was it like almost fundamentalist, or like just a normal part of your life, or your normal teenager? But Christian, that type of thing.
I went to church every Sunday. Prayed sometimes. So I guess moderate level. Okay,
so it was like a part of your life, but you weren't necessarily like living for the Lord or anything like that when you were a kid.
I guess I was. I guess it depends on what that phrase means exactly. Live for the Lord. I mean, I try to be a good Christian. Love your neighbors. Love your enemies. Read the Bible.
Right, but you weren't evangelical or any of that classic type stuff.
I guess it depends on how you're defining evangelical. I mean, there was a time where I was more conservative. I used to be a young Earth creationist at one point, and I kind of grew out of that.
Oh, you were? When you were young? When you were a kid?
Yeah, because my mom was especially very, very conservative. So she didn't accept evolution or any of that. And she kind of gave me these little creationist stuff when I was a kid. But eventually, college or whatever, I kind of was like, I think there's enough evidence for evolution. Maybe they don't have the mechanism down exactly. But I think evolution is more likely true than not. Part of the problem I was a creationist for as long as I was that anti-creationists are actually really bad at being anti-creationists. So one of the things that helped me transition to becoming an evolutionist was a book by Dillahunty called Battle Beginnings, Why Neither Side is Winning the Creation Evolution Debate. And here was a person who was, as far as I know, not a creationist, but he was like the only, non-creationist I saw that was actually viewing this point rationally. So, for example, there was this one argument called the Second Law of Thermodynamics. And I was like, okay, that seems like a pretty good argument against evolution. I'll look at what the evolutionists have to say about that. And you know how many times I saw evolutionists attack the actual argument? 0 times. Like almost every single time was some sort of straw man or red herring. And there's also loads of bad philosophy of science happening on the anti-creationist side. So if anything, I became an evolutionist almost in spite of the anti-creationist, not because of it, because there's just so many people on both sides not thinking rationally on top of the subject. It's almost as if both of them, not just the creationists, almost if both of them were like being religious about it.
Yeah, well, you definitely find that. So you went through when you went to college, or did this start to happen in high school where you went through a period where you started to question aspects of what you were raised in, it sounds like
Yeah,
a
I think
deconstruction.
a little bit in high school. So one of the things that brought me about like whether God probably exists was just was basically kind of a form of the teleological argument. I think Craig would talk about the applicability of mathematics in the universe. So I was kind of into programming back in high school. I created a video game on the TI-86 calculator, like a very simple one called DIM. And so I was kind of into computer science at the time. And one of the reasons why I think there is most likely a designer, I think God probably exists, was the nature of the universe. The universe is very much like a well-designed computer program with sophisticated mathematical patterns imprinted everywhere. When conceivably, it could have been more like a randomized hard drive, a jumbled mess with no meaningful pattern or order. And so I thought, it's like, I think this universe with its intricate mathematical order, these like algorithms imprinted everywhere, it's more likely to be this way on if it were designed than if it were not designed. And that was one of the reasons why I stuck to my theistic beliefs.
Right. So it seemed like a logical inference based on. I mean, a lot of people feel that way subjectively. I understand why some atheists say why that's not necessarily convincing to an atheist, but I also understand why it's convincing to a lot of people. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, because for a minute you cut out there. I'm afraid it starts to happen with this phone on StreamYard. I start to like jumble in and out. So you went through kind of a process of deconstruction. And you only got so far, and so you were in high school. Did you have any spiritual experiences or anything like that? Did that enter into it at all?
No, not that I'm aware of.
So what type, when you went to church, did you have like prayer meetings and things like that? But those weren't really an issue in terms of believing or not believing.
I suppose not.
Okay. So it was mostly a rational thing.
For me, yeah.
Okay. And you went through deconstruction of some of it. You're not a young Earth creationist now, right?
Yeah, I'm an evolutionist.
Okay. And so how does that actually work? I've never deconstructed. I wasn't raised Christian at all. I was raised totally secular. So I never had any dog in the fight when it came to stuff like, Earth being 6,000 years old, things like that. Was never really a viable option as far as I was concerned. So how did that work? Did you start to question it? Like, was it similar? Have you heard these atheist deconversion stories? Was it a similar thing? Like you start to, I don't know. You tell me what happens exactly.
Oh, you kind of, I guess it's sort of natural process sometimes when a lot of people get older, you get like kind of your rebellious teenager phase. You start to question authority, you start to question what other people have told you. I'm never completely without doubts. Like even now, even back then, I kind of wonder, like, there's a problem of testimony, which is how do you, almost everything I believe is because other people told me. Like even like mundane things like atoms. How do I know atoms exist? Well, people have done experiments. Have they? I've never done these experiments. People tell me these experiments have done, but I've never done them myself. So a lot of this stuff, you trust what you're told. So I sometimes wonder if I'm in a Truman-like situation. That could be true. I wouldn't know it. So there's always some level of doubt. And I think that phase was just more intense, back when I was in high school. But, you try to look at the evidence, use your best judgment. And yeah, that's where I am today.
Well, what starts to happen though? Were you in a group of people who were totally on board with this stuff? Or did you?
No, this is more spontaneous.
Right, but I mean, the people who you had friends at that age, and were they churchgoers and they were young Earth creationists? Like, I don't get how the process. I get what happens, but I don't get how it sparks necessarily.
Well, like I said, I think it was more spontaneous. I don't think I really talked to many people at the time. I was kind of like a relatively private individual, so I just kind of went through this myself.
Right, and it never brought you all the way to atheism because, as far as you were concerned, there was a strong kernel of plausibility underneath the theology, or at least underneath some aspects of the God model.
Yeah, by my lights, the kind of the world we would see is more likely to occur, like the mathematical patterns of predictive nature. It seemed more likely to be the case if God exists than if God did not exist.
Right. So what's your agenda with your channel? You're trying to you have a somewhat of a different spin on Christianity, and what are you just trying to do? Just make videos or?
So
go ahead.
There are a number of processes. I'll probably do like apologetics type stuff, but I also kind of want to spread a little bit more logic. I know that some of my videos, like the red herrings and the straw man, weren't really hardcore apologetics related. They're just more about rationality, trying to think rationally. I used examples from multiple different cases, like in the like political, for example. I'd use both the left and on the right, because one of the things I want to do after I finish my philosophy degree is write a book on logic, like kind of aim for the like K through 12 region and self-publish it so I can sell it for a relatively cheap price. Because like I mentioned in one of my YouTube channels, like I am amazed that we don't teach logic in schools. And I just think logic and rationality is so important. It boggles my mind that it isn't taught more. So that's one of the things.
That's a really interesting point, actually. It's not one of the things that you're taught in, elementary school or middle school or high school even. It's pretty foundational too to how we think and how we learn almost everything and how we argue stuff. So it probably should be one of the core things. That I agree with you.
And maybe some homeschoolers will pick it up. I'm not really sure, but I want to kind of aim for that K through 12 little niche there, because I mean, if you can learn algebra, you can learn some aspects of formal logic. Some of the basic stuff. I mean, if you get into graduate school logic, yeah, it can get pretty complicated, but some of the basics aren't that hard.
Right, but they also help you a lot in just everyday life, like understanding. Even when you look at politics, you start looking at like, is there logical consistency to what this person's saying? Is there a logical predicate for why people believe this as opposed to that? It helps you a lot. I think there's a lot of practical applications.
Yeah, I would hope that if it's one thing that theists and atheists can agree on, is that logic should be taught in schools. I mean, hopefully we can get all behind that. I mean, C.S. Lewis was at The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The professor's like, why don't they teach logic in their schools? And like, I think a lot of theists and atheists like it. I would hope can agree that logic should be taught in schools.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think that would be one we wouldn't have to fight over. So now tell me about this Rachel Oates video. Do you know, I actually streamed with her once. She was on Truth Wanted, and I called up and I had a chat with her about Jordan Peterson, her and Rationality Rules and Objectively Dan. I don't know if you know. You probably know Rationality Rules. I doubt you know Objectively Dan.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard Objectively Dan, but yeah, I've seen a number of Rationality Rules videos. I think I even reviewed some of Rationality Rules video on my blog. Not my YouTube channel, but my blog.
Yeah, he just did a stream with Jonathan Pajot on metaphorical truths, and he's one of the worst in terms of he's definitely a smart guy, but he doesn't. I don't know. It's hard to explain what goes on with him. It's a very. What's your take on it? How would you define it?
He's not a trained philosopher. I think maybe if he had some like training in philosophy and logic, maybe that would help him produce more clear thinking material. I helped John McCrae of What Do You Meme do one of his responses to kind of a response video to the Kalam cosmological argument. And I did also a blog about it. It's like, he doesn't seem to be able to like understand it and think through. And on some cases, he doesn't really seem to understand the arguments, be able to create like a reasonable objections to them. Yeah, well, in some cases.
The problem is, I'm a layperson in philosophy too, but the problem with some of the lay people in philosophy, it's not true of everybody, is that there are things that they will just wildly assert, and they don't really have enough grounding in it to understand why that's just totally off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that does happen, unfortunately. I think it's the Dunning-Kruger effect plays some role in that.
Well, it's Dunning-Kruger, and then part of it is the culture of the atheist community in some ways, because I get why they object to a lot of the arguments. I don't think they're necessarily successful either, in that if success is defined by they prove God, sure enough, I don't think they necessarily prove God either. But there are aspects of them that you can't just shrug away. You can't just go, oh, this is, and when he did a version on, what did he do a stream on? I think it was the Epicurean paradox, and it was like painful to watch. I mean, it was the elephant philosophy. I don't know if you know him, but he's.
Oh yeah, I was kind of participating in a kind of interview of sorts earlier today with elephant philosophy.
He got mentioned. He got mentioned in the same breath as you, because that's how I discovered his channel, because Capturing Christianity recommended it. So I went to check it out. His channel's great. So he then, Capturing Christianity, recommended you. And I was like, you recommended elephant philosophy, so I'm going to assume that Maverick Christian's pretty good too. But he did a thing on rationality rules, and it was like
I saw it. It was I was a bit of ambivalent to it, because I don't know. It's like, gee, it's a little bit harsher than I would like. On the other hand, it's like there is part of me that says elephant philosophy brings up some really good points that really needed to be brought up, because unfortunately, I don't know how to say this in a nice way, but rationality rules from like a philosophical standpoint did not produce a particularly good video. Again, it's because I think largely because he's a layperson, doesn't have adequate training in this field.
Well, it's deeper than that, though, because I'm a layperson, but I can tell when people are. I have enough general education to tell when people are. What do I actually do? I can tell when people know their stuff and adequately yield myself. Like, I'm not going to just. People do this on Twitter and YouTube all the time, for sure. Like, they'll start arguing quantum mechanics, and they don't have anywhere near enough background to even know what they're talking about and know why they're making mistakes. They do it in philosophy too, but it's easier to get away with. That's what I think happens. Because, go ahead.
Well, sort of. I remember, like, when Woodford said quantum mechanics is called into the question of the law of non-contradiction. I think a lot of people bought that without realizing that, no, it doesn't do anything of the sort. There is no contradictions in the mathematics of quantum mechanics at all.
Right, but he's getting that from somewhere, though. Fuzzy logic, I guess. I've never really looked into it, but
I think it's because there are some popularizers of quantum mechanics that put forth all these crazy claims that really don't have any basis in scientific fact, like Schrodinger's cat, for example. One popularization of it is like the cat is alive and dead at the same time. It's like quantum mechanics really doesn't say that, but unfortunately, a lot of people have that concept in mind.
Right. Yeah. See, I had always thought that was part of the objection, was that it was in fact something that was impossible to some degree. The state in the superposition, that there were aspects of it that couldn't be fully. It's hard to explain, but.
Well, it's the measurement problem. Where does the wave function collapse, and how does the system interact?
How well do you know quantum mechanics? If I ask you questions,
I know a little bit. I took a philosophy of quantum mechanics course years ago, and we had to learn quantum mechanics to do that, which is one of the reasons why that course is so difficult. But I knew some things about it. I probably can remember some stuff about it, but I do remember that was one of the things that we learned, was that there's there's like a matrix that kind of represents the system, and whether or not it has one value or another, it's in a superposition. But that mathematics doesn't say one way or the other. It's like a null value. It says, I can't tell you what the result will be if you do this measurement, but I can tell you the probability of what you'll get with this measurement.
Is that actually how the measurement problem is classically defined?
Well, the measurement problem is basically kind of like where the wave function collapses, if I remember right.
Right.
So it's like because like we're observers, we're part of the quantum mechanics too. So where does the wave function collapse exactly when you're doing it? And that's something that the Copenhagen interpretation per se is a little bit fuzzy on.
Right. So, hey, Stephanie, how are you? S.J. Thomason's here. Post this link out there, because this was he was supposed to show up at 6 o'clock my time, and he showed up at 3. So nobody's seen this. Stephanie, if you can hear it, post the link and tell some people to come and check it out. There's one guy who does this pop. Do you know T-Jump yet? Have you seen him? Do you know who that is?
Yeah, I actually met him briefly, like maybe a few weeks ago.
did you stream with him? Did you do a debate with him, or what happened?
I haven't streamed or done a debate with him yet. Maybe I'll do that sometime in the future.
All right, so let's talk about your morality debate, and then we'll also talk about. I like your moral argument. I think it's actually good. I think there's a lot of potential to it. You got into one debate that I saw. I think it was on Modern Day Debate. You want to tell us about that and what you're presenting?
Oh, that was with Canderman. Okay. Yeah, I gave basically argued that if God doesn't exist, then objective morality doesn't exist, and I think morality did exist, therefore God exists. And he was a non-cognitivist. Canderman was. He kind of unfortunately, he wasn't very well trained in philosophy or logic either. So I tried to get him to understand that given atheism, morality probably doesn't exist until if atheism is true, then morality doesn't exist. But he didn't really quite capture that part, unfortunately. He wasn't familiar with material implication.
Right.
So
your argument is somewhat similar to the classic William Craig argument of the same type, but it's a tiny bit better. You started off with, if I remember correctly, you started off with there's no material justification for, like, moral realism is basically, you're saying that moral realism is a fact, right? And then you use the classic, it's wrong to harm a baby for no good reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I getting this right so far?
Yeah, that's kind of the example I gave for an example of something that's morally wrong. Torturing an infant just for fun is morally wrong. And that seems like a non-controversial example that most people will recognize. Oh, yeah, that's something wrong.
Right.
So the first premise is...
That's basically a moral fact. And what I've argued is if you have one moral fact, then you have moral realism, correct? So we agree with that. And then you say there's no empirical justification for it. And you use the example of... Go ahead.
Yeah. So premise one, if God doesn't exist and nothing is morally wrong. Premise two, some things are morally wrong, like torturing if it's just for fun. Conclusion, therefore, God exists. And the justification I gave for the first premise is that given that God does not exist, let's assume for sake of argument that God does not exist. And we see that given that God does not exist, it is unlikely that there's anything morally wrong. And moral wrongness, when you think about on atheism, is a very strange property. It's invisible, it's non-physical, it's empirically undetectable. So why shouldn't the consistent atheist reject the existence of this invisible, non-physical thing that cannot be empirically detected if the atheist is to reject the existence of invisible, non-physical deities that have allegedly not been empirically detected? So given the atheism, it seems more likely that people's belief in moral wrongness is a delusion brought about by evolution to get us to behave in certain ways and to help our species survive. So given atheism, moral wrongness probably doesn't exist. And of course, the atheism can at this point kind of bite the bullet. It's like, okay, I'll assume that nothing is morally wrong. Then you have to ask yourself, which is more plausible? That there's nothing morally wrong with torturing infants just for fun, or atheism. Some atheists would sooner believe that there's nothing morally wrong with torturing infants just for fun than they are willing to believe that atheism is false. But by my lights, that's a level of irrationality akin to religious fanaticism. I mean, if I learned that my religion said there's nothing wrong with torturing infants just for fun, I was like, all right, that religion's false. Believe something else, I guess. But some atheists are willing to go that far to maintain their belief in atheism. And by my lights, that's not a reasonable thing to do.
Right. So what were some of the objections? Not necessarily the guy who you said wasn't that good in the debate, but what are some of the stronger atheist counter arguments? The good ones, the ones that you think have a point.
So probably the best debate I was in regarding this type of moral argument was with Jeffrey J. Lauder. He was a former president and co-founder of Internet Infidels. That was on Capturing Christianity. And my justification for the two premise that, given atheism, nothing is morally wrong, or objective morality doesn't exist, was basically twofold. One is that, if God doesn't exist, we don't have any good reason to believe that these moral properties exist. And the second reason was that on atheism, these moral properties are queer, strange in a way to make them unlikely. So, for example, to give an example of how the argument from queerness kind of goes, like, imagine if I say there's an invisible unicorn hovering above my head right now. Right. Now, this claim is possible, but not plausible. You justified and disbelieving it. Well, why? Well, invisible floating unicorns are wildly different from the types of things we know exist in a way that would make them implausible, at least have a low prior probability. And what Jeffrey J. Lauder, he conceded the first point that on atheism, we don't have any good reason to believe that reality exists, but he argued that they're not really that queer. And that was part he objected to. That was probably the best objection I've seen to it, him arguing that they're not really that queer after
Do
all.
you know who Eric Weilenberg is? I think I'm pronouncing his name right.
Weilenberg. I thought it was Wielenberg. Eric Wielenberg,
good. Yes.
the philosopher.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually I cited him on a term.
His argument is somewhat similar to yours, and he was actually on Capturing Christianity too. What he's saying is that there's a basic. It's very similar to an epistemic virtue. Like if you see somebody lit on fire next to you, it's similar to what you're saying, that there's an intrinsic moral oughtness that a rational, like a decent human being, just a normal person, feels I ought to do something about it, or I ought to help that person. I ought to put that fire out. Let me just say hi. Hey, Spartan, how are you? He did a great stream the other day with I forget what the guy's name is. Nanus, I think his name. Go ahead. Go, Maverick.
Oh, I lost my place now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was. The Spartan Theology did a really good stream.
So I was talking about Jeffrey G. Lauder.
The Weilenberg justification is very similar to yours, and then it's basically like, there's a certain intrinsic moral oughtness that a normal person would perceive and act upon. If I'm summarizing it right.
Yeah, I think it's Wielenberg.
Right. Okay. So go ahead. What do you say to that? You read it. You know him, right?
Well, I don't know him personally, but I've read some of his material. I cited something he wrote for my term paper, my philosophy of religion class, where I argued that if naturalism is true, we don't have moral knowledge, which is one of the things that I talked with Elephant Philosophy. So there's an upcoming Elephant Philosophy video on that.
Oh, that'd be good. So what? So you were telling me the objection, the main objection, the one that you found, and then I brought him up, and you don't find it challenging at all?
You mean Jeffrey J. Lauder's attack on the queerness morality?
No, I was talking about still the Wielenberg. That is.
Oh, well, yeah, Wielenberg brought it up that we can we intuit that some things are morally wrong, but I don't think that if atheism is true, this intuition would deliver moral knowledge. One of the problems is that moral properties, at least barring the supernatural, are causally inert. And so think about what gives us our intuitions on atheism. Well, it's just sociobiological evolution gives us these intuitions, but because moral properties like moral wrongness are causally inert, our brains would give us the same intuitions of morality's existence, regardless of whether morality existed. That would seem to undercut such intuition from properly justifying our belief in morality. To give an example, imagine there's a metal detector that reports it's over a metal deposit. This metal detector says, oh, there's metal, but this metal detector is faulty. It delivers the message that there is metal, regardless of whether it contained metal or not. So if you believe that there was metal on the basis of this faulty metal detector, you might have a justified belief that there's metal, but this belief wouldn't constitute knowledge because it would give us that same report that there's metal, regardless of whether metal existed. Same thing with moral intuition. If we're in an environment where we'd have this intuition of morality existence, regardless of whether it existed, that seems to undercut such intuition from properly justifying our belief in morality. It prevents it from being knowledge. And so that's why I think moral intuition on atheism wouldn't deliver more knowledge. That's largely why on atheism, we don't have any good reason to believe that morality exists.
Right. No, I think you're onto something actually pretty good, because like what were you talking about with the evolution thing? So like what's the underlying logic? If we're just like a bag of cells, as the atheists would say, like we're just a bag of what's the thing they always say? Like we're just a bag of enzymes going hither and thither. There's no actual intrinsic morality. There may be things that you're intuiting as morally correct, but there's no actual ontology of wrongness to the action. So it's basically not coherent. Is that kind of what you're saying, or did I get that wrong?
Well, so it was basically two parts. One of them is that if atheism is true, we don't have any good reason to believe that morality exists. And the other part is moral wrongness is like a non-natural, invisible property that's kind of queer on atheism in a way that makes it prima facie unlikely. That if we don't have any good reason to believe that exists, it's unlikely to exist. So it's possible that there's this invisible, non-natural property like associated with the stuff we do on atheism. It's logically possible. There's no self-contradiction in it. But given atheism, it seems unlikely. It seems kind of far-fetched. It's like if I said there's an invisible dragon in my garage, you probably wouldn't accept that. It's not very plausible because it's different from the types of things we know exist. But the same thing is with non-natural, invisible moral wrongness. We don't have any good reason to believe that exists. And in the absence of any good reason to believe that exists, it's a type of thing that seems unlikely.
Right. I mean, I definitely think you're onto something good because it's very similar to some of the non-dualist arguments. Like, you know, it's really hard to rationally justify being a pure physicalist because it seems at least that there are
I think it cut out there.
people who are moral subjectivists live their life as if there are moral facts. Like, you don't teach your kids, you know, everything. It's cool, whatever you do. You teach them right from wrong, you know, as if there are such qualities, right? Yes?
Yeah, it's very interesting that even this people who claim to be moral nihilists act very much as if they do believe that morality exists. C.S. Lewis brought this up. I quoted C.S. Lewis on one of the blog episodes. How it's interesting how I think he put it like they know far better than they think they do, something like that.
Right. Right. Well, that's what people who call themselves moral subjectivists, you know, they only calling themselves that. They don't act as if they're moral objectivists, and they don't raise their kids as if they're subjectivists. You know, they teach their kids, don't steal. Why? Because it's just wrong. Don't hit your sister. Why? Because it's wrong. You know what I'm saying? So there's an actual ontology that they practice, whether they assent to it in their belief system is different. Stephen Nemes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I don't really have anything to add to that.
Okay, so let's talk about one of the things that Doug brought up. For example, when you brought this up on him, he posted this your moral part of your conversation with Doug. I don't know if you noticed that yet.
Doug, is that Pine Creek?
Yes, that's Pine Creek.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that atheist farm boy interacts with Christian philosopher, and philosopher scare quotes like that seems a little bit disrespectful.
Well, it's funny because you, as far as I know, you weren't presenting yourself as like the philosopher king of YouTube, were you? I mean, like,
no, I didn't. In fact, I very specifically said in the video that I was the philosophy Padawan, which for those who aren't geeks means like a newcomer, like just starting out. That's what I characterized myself in the video, and somehow it just transmogrified into philosopher, with philosopher in square quotes. Like, I know I'm just a philosophy student. I only have one paper that's actually published.
Well, he scored some points on you for titling it that way. So you're just gonna have to let it be. The one thing that he brought up where he starts arguing against, I guess he was arguing against moral objectivism or moral realism. He starts talking about how it's a product of evolution. And what do you remember the part where he brought up about the dogs, female dog, where the female dog is being essentially raped by the male dog, and way back when on the plains of Africa, you know, that's how we copulated. Do you remember this when he brought this up?
Yeah, I thought he was like, I maybe should have looked that up later, but it's like, that seems kind of dubious to me because consensual, I mean, yeah, forcible copulation does happen in the animal kingdom, but so does consensual copulation. That happens all the time in the animal kingdom. And he was talking about, it's like, well, people were raping all the time where humans came evolved like several 100,000 years ago. It's like, I'm pretty sure humans were around for several million years. But anyway,
right, it also kind of missed the point because that that doesn't mean that the morality evolved. That means that people's perception of what was morally right and wrong may have changed over time. But that doesn't, because you're arguing that there's an intrinsic moral wrong to the act itself, which still would have been true even if all the human beings were wrong about it, just like they would have been in Nazi Germany, right? That's the classic example. They were all trained by their culture to believe that, you know, like destroying the Jews was the right thing to do. Didn't mean it was the right thing to do. So it would be the same thing for his example. Just because go ahead.
Yeah, potentially. I think maybe I was interpreting him overly charitably, but maybe because at one point our ancestors, you know, evolutionary ancestors were not yet moral agents. And so you can say there was a time where we weren't yet moral agents, but later on we were. You could make that. I guess that's how I was kind of interpreting him. Maybe I was being overly charitable.
Well, no, I think that's the proper way to interpret it. It's like, you know, but that doesn't mean there was no morality there to be perceived. It just means that the human beings at the time couldn't perceive it, right? It doesn't mean there is no right, just like they didn't know quantum mechanics back then. It doesn't mean there was no quantum mechanics to be known. Like, he seemed to think that the morality itself evolves just because people's perception of the morality evolves. And those are two separate things.
I don't think he even believed that, because it seemed that he didn't even believe in morality on the moral semantics I was using. Probably should define morality. So, and because I've seen that atheists and theists can sometimes talk past each other when it comes to morality. Sometimes oughts are and shoulds are purely descriptive, like when if you want to do well in school, you ought to study just means something like, as a matter of practical necessity, you need to study to do well in school.
Right.
And some oughts prescribe in a way that is not purely descriptive. So someone saying you shouldn't torture infants might be using this sort of ought. And the type of morality I was talking about was that second type of ought, where moral oughts prescribe in a way that is not entirely descriptive, which is like the common sense type of morality that, people mean when they say, don't torture infants. That's morally wrong. Morally wrong being you shouldn't do it. Now, in that normal common sense sort of morality, he apparently does not believe that morality exists. So he wouldn't even be a moral relativist or a cultural relativist, because he doesn't believe that sort of morality exists.
Yeah, but part of the reason that he put forth as a justification is that way back when in the savannah, people were doing things that were intrinsically morally wrong, and they didn't know they were morally wrong. And according to his logic, therefore, they weren't morally wrong. The morality itself evolved, which it didn't. The ontology of the morality would have been the same transcendently back then as today. It's just that the people didn't have the moral, knowledge then to understand morality properly. Does what I'm saying make sense? It's just like they didn't know quantum mechanics. It's the same idea.
It is true that just because, some people of our past weren't aware of morality doesn't mean that the morality didn't exist.
Well, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I said it clearly enough, but that's what he was arguing of. That the morality itself evolved because their understanding of the morality evolves. A lot of atheists make that argument. They'll say that like the Bible is morally subjective, for very similar reasons.
Yeah. One thing, objection against cultural relativism is something called the reformer's dilemma, where suppose, for example, you have a nation that was slavery. Slavery was the norm. And you have some reformer says, I don't think slavery is a good idea. I think it's morally wrong. Right. At that particular time, that reformer is mistaken. He's doing something wrong and going and saying like, freeing the slaves or whatever. He's incorrect.
Right.
And so cultural relativism has this rather strange implication that the reformer is incorrect. When today we'd say, no, I think the reformer actually did something right. It's right. Good to throw away the shackles of slavery. Good to not be slavery or racist or segregation or any of that sort of thing. So that is kind of one of the odd and implausible implications of cultural moral relativism.
Well, some of the same people who argue that morality is subjective also will tell you sometime in the same stream, in the same debate, slavery is wrong. Okay, well, and morality isn't subjective. If it's intrinsically wrong, and we all know that it is, then that's an argument for moral realism. The reformer would have been correct, and he would have had some type of moral epiphany or moral awakening, whether it was through religion or... that's why I think it's a strong argument, because that reformer was probably, a Christian, went into his prayer closet and, read the Bible, and it said, each of us are created in the image of God, and he put an inference to that. Well, that means him too. That means that guy who's enslaved. Right? No? Maybe?
Oh, yeah. There were some, also when I was in college, I did a kind of report on slavery in the 19th century America. And a lot of like reformers were Christians, but of course, so were some of the slaveholders who were both trying to rationalize or justify their own beliefs based on the Bible. But yeah, it is true that a lot of the reformers were Christians, including those who were like wanted to abolish slavery, often did so in the name of their religion. Right,
but there's also like scriptural predicate. That which you've done unto the least of my children, you've done unto me. So that would mean the enslaved person. Just logically.
Yeah, you could justify the abolition of slavery on biblical basis. There's probably a lot of practices we have right now that 1,000 years from now will be considered barbaric, and you can kind of trace the origins, the seed of it, in Scripture. So, for example, I love your neighbor as yourself. That's a sensible thing, right? Now, even now, we don't really apply that commandment fully. If we had always applied that commandment fully, we wouldn't have had slavery in the first place. We would have had equality. We wouldn't have had racism or segregation or any of that nonsense. And even now, we're pretty savage. We're pretty, like, to give an example, I could suppose Jim is going to a store to buy a big screen television set because he wants a big television set to watch football in. Now, he could have given that money to, like, feed some starving kids in like another country that really need it. Now, if he loved his neighbor as himself, which would he value more? The kid, the starving children, or watching a big screen TV? Now, if he applied that rule consistently, he wouldn't be buying that huge screen TV. He would give that money over to help feed some starving children. And probably, and we might say to ourselves that action is supererogatory. It's not morally obligatory. But there's like some part of me that says, we really don't apply this value of loving your neighbor as yourself now. We still have a long ways to go. And a lot of things that are considered reform now, that are considered relatively liberal, are basically, those seeds are way back in scripture, and we just still haven't learned to apply them fully.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. There's some form of radical admonition in the scripture that's implicit as to how you are to strive to be, morally good, morally compassionate, merciful and kind in any and all situations. And you're held to a standard that, according to the Bible, should be perfection. Obviously, we're not going to hit that standard, but that's the standard that we are to aspire to. Walk before me and be perfect as I am perfect. I think that's kind of what you mean. Is that kind of what you mean? That there's way more to it if we were to really, truly, you know the intrinsic Christianity thing, right? You know what people are talking about when we bring that up?
Intrinsic Christianity, I'm not sure. I don't think I've heard of it.
Okay, intrinsic religiosity is how we differentiate between, it's kind of it's from sociology. It's like the practicing Christians who really mean it and walk the walk.
Okay, that does sound familiar now that you mention it.
Well, it's useful for, like, when you're having debates on whether religion is net benefit to society. You differentiate. Okay. There's the people who are intrinsically religious, who actually practice what they preach and are doing it to be true to their faith and their God model, not because whatever the other people are doing, because they want to make money scamming congregants or whatever the other guys are doing.
Okay, yeah, I think I remember reading a sociological study or commentary or something where people who are actively religious, like go to church on Sunday, actually participate in the religious community, are actually more likely to do the charitable stuff, donate blood and whatnot. I vaguely remember intrinsic religion. That does sound familiar now that you mention it.
Right. So all I'm saying is that to those people who are trying to actually do what Paul said, like, imitate me as I imitate Christ, we don't necessarily find ourselves sufficiently Christ-like. We see that there's, as you said, a ways to go. I'm trying to add to what you said. For people who are motivated to actually practice Christianity in a way that's they take it for real, they would definitely think that they are falling short of the mark to some degree. Yeah.
I think if we're honest with ourselves, we realize that, I'm not really that good of a person.
Right.
Still sinners in need of a savior.
Right. And that's exactly what Christianity is trying to show you, or it's trying to give to you, that revelation.
Yeah. I still remember if I were ever a pastor, I think one of the things I would do would be like teach on would be like the virtue of self-honesty, like how Jesus taught about, here's this, religious authority. And here's this other guy who said, religious authority says, God, thank you for not making like this sinner over here. And the other sinner says, have pity on me, a sinner. Right. And Jesus says that person who recognized his own flaws, he was the one who was right with God that day. It's like, that virtue of self-honesty, to recognize that we're not really that good is so key to becoming a good Christian.
Right. And the other person is kind of the model of what everybody thinks of as the fundamentalist. The guy who's holier than thou and actually getting in everybody's face because they're, dancing with side dancing or wearing a miniskirt or something like that. That's how I take the other guy to be, the religious person.
Yeah.
So, okay. So now tell me about the Rachel Oates.
So I did a couple videos, the red herrings one or the straw man?
Straw man. The straw man is the one I watched.
Okay. So I only talked to her briefly about that, where she accused Cameron of discounting all questions. And I was saying, and I kind of point out, I was like, I don't, that's not what he did in the video. He doesn't count all questions. Quite the contrary. Cameron believes questions are really helpful. They can, they can lessen the tension. They can clarify disagreements. They make an otherwise unproductive conversation productive again. At least that's what I got the impression from Cameron's video. And I said something like, to be fair, I think Cameron's partially at fault here for not making himself absolutely 100% transparent, crystal clear on this sort of thing. And then I cut to Cameron saying basically exactly what I said. And it's like, oops. I guess he did make himself clear. So why did Rachel Oakes go on the internet and tell lies?
Yeah, that was fun.
And it's like, I don't think she lied. I think she made an honest mistake. And one of the reasons why I think she did so is because she played that clip of Cameron very specifically, not discounting all the questions and very specifically saying that questions are really helpful before, shortly after that, accused Cameron of discounting all questions. So I just think she just wasn't thinking rationally. And unfortunately, this sort of thing happens. There was part of my debate with Canterman in which he strawmanned a view seconds after I said it. There was the notorious Kathy Newman interview with Jordan Peterson, strawman Jordan Peterson moments after he said his actual position. And this is kind of an unfortunate fact that sometimes humans just don't think rationally. We all need to be very careful.
That Kathy Newman thing is like the ultimate classic. I think that got like 50 million total views or 100 million total views. That is where he's like, and he even goes like, "Ha ha, gotcha." He's like, it's like totally organic. He wasn't trying to give the gotcha moment. It was just like, you're talking about the one where he's like, that's what you're doing right now. You're asking questions that make me feel really uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. And more power to you, I think. Yeah, Jordan totally. Peterson's carried these very careful, nuanced views. It's like, oh no, there is some discrimination, gender discrimination. It's just not the whole factor. There's these certain other factors that go into play. Nuanced position, and Kathy Newman seemed hell bent on painting him as some sort of extremist.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what she was there to do. That's what made it so like farcical, because he did get her, and basically it was such a turnaround, but he wasn't trying to expose her. It was just happened. It was a normal part of the organic part of the give and take that she that's why it was so popular, because it was just so obvious. So in the Rachel Oates, I actually like her as a person. She was pretty nice we were talking about Jordan Peterson too with her, and I was talking about Jordan Peterson with her and Rationality Rules. What's your take on Peterson, and what do you think the classic anti-theist atheist take is?
Well, I'm somewhat familiar with Jordan Peterson. It's been a while since I've really delved into some of his stuff, but I was really irritated about how he seemed to have been mischaracterized. That was the part that really irritated me. Like I pointed out, there was this NBC Nightly News segment that also seemed to grossly mischaracterize him. P.C. Sitch did a really good job exposing that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, what it is that there was a part of Jordan Peterson that was a legitimate threat to the entire thesis of the anti-theist. He's not necessarily an apologist, but in some ways he's more effective apologist than a lot of Christian apologists, because his version of religion as something sociologically useful is really obviously true and predicated in fact. So it was kind of they were trying to preemptively get rid of him by calling him alt-right and associating with, he has some opinions that could be classified like that, but that's very little part of who he is, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I think he got some flack for, there was a Canadian law that some people have interpreted as compelling speech. Now, it's more controversial whether it would have that effect, because whether it has an effect kind of interacts with other things. And that's what kind of got really on the radar. And some people say, oh, he's a transphobe. But it's like, no, he's not. He just didn't want to have compelled speech.
Right. I think he made that pretty clear that that his objection was that he was a free speech purist. Now, you can disagree with him on that law, but people took that and ran with it to see like he's a transphobe, and they ran with it. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's my guess of the genesis of this whole misconstrual. A somewhat similar thing seems to have happened with J.K. Rowling. I don't know if you followed that. I read of actually J.K. Rowling's little piece on like transgender stuff. She seems
It's
to be
entirely similar, except it's motivated differently. I think the people, I haven't looked into it. I watched the Twitter back and forth and was like, wow, they'll go after everybody. But tell me what it is exactly, because I didn't bother to dive in because I knew it would just annoy me. But go ahead.
Okay, so one thing I've noticed that sometimes like partisan culture war stuff, some people take what something says and like interpret it in the worst possible way. And that's what some people have done with J.K. Rowling tweets. Like for example, she tweeted out something like people with uteruses, and she tweeted about like, don't we just call them women? Pretty sure we have a word for that. Don't we call them women? Something like that. And people found that as transphobic to refer to use the word woman to refer to people with uteruses, to refer to biological females.
Right, but wasn't she kind of throwing that out there for the trans culture war? Like, wasn't she kind of red baiting them a little bit, or baiting them a little bit, or was it entirely innocent, or did she not know the context for how a lot of trans activists would take the statement?
I don't. Well, I'm not a mind reader. I'm not really sure. I would think, but my best guess is that she thought it was kind of ridiculous that we're not using the word woman to refer to biological females. That was my take on the Twitter. Like, why can't we just use woman to refer to adult biological females?
So you're saying it's basically a harmless statement, as a matter of fact.
Well, like I said, I can't read her mind, but I thought she was kind of humorously poking fun at the fact that we could just call them women. We don't need to go this far. But some people take that as using the term woman to mean biological females as transphobic. I guess because people think that, oh, if you're saying that trans women aren't women, and my response to that would be like, well, it depends on how you define women. I mean, some people use the term woman to refer to biological females. Some people use the term differently, maybe depending on the context. But that was how I took it. She thought it was kind of ridiculous that we can't use, at least in some context, at least in medical context, to use for women to refer to adult biological females.
Right. So what was the blowback? It got intense,
she thought she was.
right?
People thought she was transphobic.
Right.
Among other, there are a lot of tweets where people like basically interpret the worst possible way to think that she's transphobic. Though I'm not even sure what transphobic means. I would ordinarily think it would be like animosity or like in favor of discrimination against trans people. And that's not what she's in favor of. She has a little bit more nuanced view about it. But like she doesn't like certain extremists would say it's like, oh yeah, biological sex isn't real. You know, some have gone that far, or the idea that another extremist view for on some trans activists is the idea that if you're a biological male, but you would self-identify as female, you can compete in the women's division without even having to go under hormone treatments or any of that stuff. There are some extremists on that end, for example. And you can two things can be true at the same time. You can believe that transgender people should, be kind to them, treat them equally, but there are certain instances where that are going too far, like a transgender woman competing in a women's category without having undergo any hormone therapy or anything at all. Competing is like, well, that doesn't seem fair. That seems kind of category defeating. And she's kind of on that. I'm in favor of trans rights, but just don't go too far. That seemed to be her category. But sometimes even if you go that far, you might be labeled a transphobe. Even if you think transgender people should have equal rights as anybody else, not be discriminated against, and so forth.
You'll totally be. You won't. Might be. Did you see the? You seem to know rationality rules. Did you see the blowback when he put out?
Oh yeah, I saw the blowback for that one too. I also saw what do you mean also did something like that. And I'm not saying he didn't make any mistakes, but he seemed to try to approach the issue rationally. And
that blowback got really intense because where I talked to him and Rachel, they were on Truth Wanted, which is Objectively Damned, which is a sideshow of Atheist Experience. It's ACA, and people actually quit the Atheist Experience. People, long-standing members who have been members for like 5, 6, 7 years, not because they took a position on his trans gender video, but because he was on the show at all.
Yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. I can understand maybe saying, "Oh, I think you got your facts wrong," but to call him a transphobe from that video is like, That's not a reasonable position to take. I don't think you could reasonably infer from that he's transphobic, even if he got certain facts wrong.
That's what the huge part of the debate was. There was a lot of people calling him that. But the part that I found really, really, really like somewhat scary is that the people were not upset about his video, which totally legitimate. Someone makes a video, you think it's wrong, and you think it's harmful. Fine, state your your case. But they were upset with Atheist Experience that he was allowed to stream on their platform, like they were somehow tacitly endorsing his position, which I think is like, that's like, wow.
Yeah, it's weird because it's almost like religious like, and that you don't want to contaminate yourself. You don't want to be ceremonially or ritually unclean by associating with a person who has this disgusting views.
That's, I mean, it's entirely, it's very similar to like how the the really hardcore fundamentalists are. It's really religious, and it's got this really like strong moral component to it of self-righteousness. Like, you just don't see it if you're and so many times they say you're like a terrible person, like a ghoul. they'll call him a ghoul, and you a ghoul for even thinking his point of view is correct. It's like, it's not negotiable, it's not discussable, it's just plain evil. So it's very similar to an extreme type of religious position, I think. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's more or less right. Unfortunately, you can kind of sometimes see in some political circles, and kind of emotionally heated situations where the other political side isn't just wrong; they're actually malevolent, like they're racist or some awful thing.
Yeah, you see that a lot. You see that a lot nowadays. I think it's been exacerbated a lot by Twitter because there's some drama stoking going on, which is increasing it to some degree.
Yeah, social media, I think, has accelerated it. Though America has become increasingly partisan for a long time now, even though social media might have accelerated it.
Yeah, it's been totally partisan, but social media is like amplified it because, actually even I'm on social media very little, but I read a lot of the partisan like crazy stuff because it's really interesting. It's the stuff that's like, what's more entertaining? You know what I mean? Like, I follow that whole rationality rules melodrama for that reason. So, what was I going to ask you? So, in the tell me more about the Rachel Oates video, the one that we were just discussing.
Oh, well, that was basically all I quoted from her in that particular video. The other one was on red herring maneuvers. But yeah, because I had already done most of the Rachel Oates stuff there in that video.
Oh, okay. So the thing that I think he's right about is that when he's saying that questions are not arguments, that's one of the things that threw me originally, is that people have questions about. You're always going to have questions about like the Bible, or why would God do this, or why would they're not necessarily defeaters for any aspect of Christianity. Most of them aren't at all, I think. But what would you say?
I think part of his point was that questions aren't arguments, but they can sometimes feel like arguments. And sometimes when you transition the question directly into an argument, the argument is actually kind of weak and not very good. And so you have to remember to think logically. But I thought that was a very, very good insight that I don't think I picked up on initially, that a question can feel like an argument, even though it's not. It doesn't actually provide a very good reason to change your beliefs. And I'm all for that. Think logically. Yes.
Yeah.
Long live logic.
Yeah, totally. I agree. So, how many debates have you been on? You were on a debate in Capturing Christianity? Is that correct?
Oh yeah, Jeffrey J. Louder. I was with him there. I guess I mean, there's been like the kind of informal debates where like I disagree with somebody on Facebook and we have a back and forth that way. But as far as like the kind of published debates that we've had on YouTube or on my blog, I'm not really sure how many I've had. I haven't kept track.
Oh, really? What was the favorite of the ones that you've?
I think my favorite was the one with Jeffrey J. Lauder. He was one of the best interlocutors I've had with the moral argument. The moral argument, I think, is like a kind of a favorite of mine because I think it has like the real Achilles heel for atheism is how to handle morality's existence. You know, that and the kind of the argument for moral knowledge, because it seems so unlikely to me that morality exists, and yet denying its reality doesn't seem reasonable at all. Like I've said before, it doesn't seem reasonable to believe that there's nothing morally wrong with torturing it if it's just for fun.
Yeah, well, it's definitely not. Have you ever just debated somebody on morality as moral realism versus non-moral realism? Have you ever just done that?
Well, I kind of did that with Cantorman. Cantorman was a moral non-cognitivist. But at the end of the day, those debates aren't particularly interesting because think about what you can do. You have a kind of a reductio argument. It's like, well, if moral nihilism is true, nothing is morally wrong, not even torturing if it's just for fun. The moral nihilist could say, yeah, I accept that. Nothing's wrong with torturing if it's just for fun. It's like, what do you do at that point? You can't think of a bigger absurdity to refute that position, really.
So is that what happened? Did he just kind of go, I quit the debate while we're debating?
I thought that's probably what happened, but somehow we kept the debate going. Part of it was, yeah, I'd have to go back to the debate to see how it kind of kept going. I do remember one of that was the material conditional and how he had difficulty grasping it, and how even after he grasped the concept, he still didn't believe me about how the material conditional worked. It was kind of frustrating, but part of it, I blame the K through 12 education system because we don't teach people logic. And by golly, working apologetics would be so much easier if everybody learned logic. That's worth it by itself for me.
Well, I mean, the atheists seem to think that they have it all down. They seem to think that they become, really well versed in it. So they would probably
a lot of times they're not. I mean, it's possible that you can sell. I remember I wrote one video. I won't name names, but there's this one video I saw where somebody was saying, "Do you know what the pi conditional is?" It's like, yes. All right. What conditional is the biconditional is true? And the guy dodged the question, kept dodging the question. It's like, okay, this guy, he pretends to know what he's talking about. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
You can name names if you want to. I mean,
no, it's too. No.
No, I won't force you into a food fight with any of the people in the atheist community. So, do you don't go on Twitter though, and you don't necessarily interact?
I'm on Twitter sometimes. Yeah, I'm not like super duper active, but I tweet there occasionally.
Oh, okay, but you're not in like the mix in the trenches, so to speak. Like
not very deep in the trenches. Maverick Christian, Maverick Xgen. I think that's how it is on Twitter. Not super deep in there.
Right. So Pine Creek Doug, you interacted with, and any other run-ins with any of the well-known YouTubers or any of that, the popular atheists?
No, I've kind of sort of kept off the radar for the most part. I haven't, because at that time, until Capturing Christianity gave me a shout out, I only had a few hundred subscribers. Now I'm nearing 1,000 right now. It's like 947 or something like that.
Yeah, and he totally boosted the views on that Rachel Oates video. I think it was something like 3,000 last time I looked, getting close to it, which is pretty cool. And like I said, that's how I heard of you. That's how I met you in that little, in that little post on his. I guess that was on his channel, something that shows up in the feed. I'm not even sure what those things are.
I think it's his community tab that had it.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So yeah, I mean, that doesn't seem like you're all. The trenches can get really weird when you just go into the general atheist population and deal with people on Twitter. One of the people in the chat right now, Stephanie, has like reams of atheists always on her. Every time she tweets, there's like 10 of these like obnoxious troll atheists. Christianity is so dumb. So you don't really you haven't really gone right into the heart of the matter.
Occasionally, not super often.
So how'd you find the Pine Creek Doug stream? Would you say?
Oh, I searched for myself on YouTube. Maverick Christian, typed it in there, and the Pine Creek thing popped up live stream, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna enter into it. He's gonna talk about me. So I jumped on there.
Uh-oh.
So how did you find out about it? Something similar? Search for Maverick Christian.
Did you talk?
Yeah, I talked.
I just cut out.
Okay, so I said that I just searched for Maverick Christian on YouTube, and the Pine Creek thing popped up. It's like, oh, Pine Creek's gonna do a response video about me, what something I did apparently. So that's how I found out about it. Did you find out about it something similar? You searched for Maverick Christian, that popped up?
I can't hear you. You're cutting out. Search for Maverick Christian is all I heard.
Yeah, that's how I found out about it.
Oh, the Pike. But how'd you think it went? The actual.
Oh, how do you think it went? So I think I did relatively okay for the moral part. Less so with the resurrection part because I wasn't prepared. Because I was more prepared for the moral argument part, and less so for the resurrection. Because I had 3 separate people that week who wanted me to debate the resurrection. It's like, it's not really my thing.
Right.
But
To be completely fair to him, the flying man resurrection thing wasn't entirely his fault. The people in the live chat started asking him to do it.
yeah,
So
that seemed to be the kind of genesis of it.
it was like, get the Christian. Here's the Christian. Get him.
But yeah, the moral thing was more what I was thinking about ahead of time. The reason why I accepted his invite, one reason why I wanted to talk with him is that he didn't seem to understand what he was criticizing well enough to criticize it on my video. As particularly the part where moral properties are empirically undetectable. It's like, no, I can see somebody doing a morally wrong action, and so I can see morally wrong. It's like, no, that's not what it's. You're not really grasping what it meant.
It's the actual action itself is unavailable for empirical investigation.
You can see you can see the action. You can't see the moral wrongness associated with that action.
Right.
So you can have a moral nihilist and a moral realist both observe somebody kick a dog just for fun. The dog whimpers in pain and runs away. The moral realist and the moral nihilist can both agree on all the same empirically observable facts. They can agree on the same, that dog felt pain, suffered minor injury, and so forth, and disagree about whether moral wrongness is associated with that fact. So because moral realism and moral nihilism, they're empirically indistinguishable from each other. In that sense, moral wrongness is empirically undetectable. And he didn't seem to grasp that initially when he viewed my video.
On the channel, I don't remember what he was saying. What was his argument against that? Because that seems to me pretty straightforward.
Once I explained it to him, I think he accepted it. But he didn't. When I said moral wrongness was empirically undetectable, originally in that video, I didn't give the kicking of the dog explanation right there. I was just giving a very brief overview about so why some people are atheists. I think that was the title of the vlog episode. And I kind of condensed it. I cut out some parts because explaining everything can take a little while.
Right. I mean, it's a really good point, though. The actual intrinsic wrongness of the act itself is not available for empirical investigation. So there's no way empiricism can tell us anything about it. That's the gist of it, right?
Yeah. Now I said it in vlog episode 6. So originally I thought that the fact that moral wrongness isn't like a physical thing that you can see was just sort of obvious to almost everybody. Then I realized that for some subset of the population, it's not so obvious. And I have to give the kicking the dog kind of example. But that particular video, I don't think I did it just to save time.
Oh, I see.
Because I assumed that vlog episode 6, most of the audience would be my fellow theists, and they might not realize why some people are atheists. And so I gave here's one big reason why a lot of people are atheists, and that was what the video was largely about.
Right, I got you. I think there's a lot that you can build off of, though, just from that one observation. Was that observation something unique to you, or did you get it from some other person?
So the idea that moral wrongness is empirically undetectable in that way, that kind of example, I think I came up with myself. I don't think I was the first person to come up with the observation that moral wrongness is empirically undetectable, but that sort of scenario and explaining what I meant by moral wrongness being empirically detectable, that I came up independently. I didn't get that from anyone.
Right. I mean, you could appeal to consequentialism with a logical, empirical, I guess if you got really sketchy with it, like the dog is now suffering and, the suffering of the something like that. You could probably make it a consequentialist appeal.
Well, you can define morality entirely. So one thing I did do in the video was to find what I mean by morality. So you can find morality so that moral wrongness is like entirely descriptive. It has only descriptive characteristics. But how I was defining morality is that prescribes in a way that is not purely descriptive. That means morality is non-natural.
Right. The
So
classic ought from an is.
Yeah, the whole Hume's famous is-ought problem. And in his, I think it was A Treatise of Human Nature, when he described the is-ought problem, he specifically had the moral ought in mind. And that's notable because, I mean, if your definition of morality of the moral ought was nothing more, it was synonymous with something purely descriptive, you wouldn't have that is-ought problem in the first place.
Yeah, no, totally. That's and I think he spells it out, right? As far as I remember, that it's he's talking about prescriptive. Otherwise, it doesn't even make sense. But I'm pretty sure he's clear on that, right?
Well, he does kind of describe it. I think he sort of like assumes that, because the idea that the moral ought prescribes in a way that is not purely descriptive. I mean, I've always understood morality to be that way. And that's sort of, I don't think he says it outright, but he just say the moral ought. It's like, how do you deduce an ought from it is? It's like, not sure how you do that. That was basically the gist of it. I think it was like chapter 3, section 1.2 or something like that. But that was kind of the implication of it. It's like, how do you do some moral is from an ought? And he specifically had the moral ought in mind.
Now, have you ever seen Matt Dillahunty's chess analogy? I think he borrowed it from Sam Harris.
Chess analogy? It's not ringing any bells. Go ahead and describe it.
When he's talking about, have you read the?
Okay. I think it's coming back to me about whether it has to do with like whether it's a good move in chess or not. Kind of depends on the rules of the game.
Right. Correct. Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, and he's using it in terms of morality, like defining morality as well-being, and then you can decide, just as you can empirically decide what the best, or objectively decide which is the best move in chess that's going to yield the best results. What do you think on that?
In vlog episode 4, I have a video that says why Dillahunty lost the debate before it began. And I kind of
cool. Let's get him. Let's do it. Let's take him on. Okay, go ahead.
And kind of what I pointed out is that here we have a situation where the theists and atheists are basically talking past each other, because morality, Dillahunty defined morality in terms of something that's entirely descriptive. He evidently did not believe in that, the type of ought that prescribes in a way that is not purely descriptive. And so when John Ferrer was talking about, so, if we need God for morality, because without God, there'd be no need for, there wouldn't be morality. We wouldn't have morality without God. And Matt Dillahunty basically agrees with the point of the debate. So there's really no point in having the debate in the first place. Dillahunty agrees with the idea that without God, there is no such thing as morality in the normal sense of the term.
There's no such thing as prescriptive morality. There's descriptive morality as according to his chess analogy.
Yeah, if you define moral ought to have some sort of entirely descriptive meaning, then yeah, that sort of moral ought can exist. But that's not the type of morality most people use when they talk about something being morally wrong. They mean that you, in addition to like decreasing well-being, it's something that you just shouldn't do. You really shouldn't do that. And that moral ought that's so crucial to morality, to moral obligation, is not present in Dillahunty's worldview. He doesn't believe that type of ought exists. And so he doesn't believe that morality in the normal sense of the term exists.
Have you ever, 2 questions. Have you read The Moral Landscape, Sam Harris?
Oh yeah, I read that a while ago. And I think it basically suffers from the same problem. He doesn't, you can define morality descriptively, but and that's basically what Dillahunty does, like the well-being of conscious creatures. But that you still don't end up with morality in the normal sense of the term. Science can't actually give us that sort of metaphysical type ought, the ought that prescribes in a way that isn't purely descriptive. That's philosophy.
Well, okay, now the second question is, what you're kind of talking about is a conscience, as we classically refer to it. The thing inside of you that knows, I really shouldn't just do that because it's, I want to do it, but I shouldn't. Not because of consequences, because it's just there's a conscience, which is some sort of just plain wrongness intrinsically to the act. How do these people ever deal with that? Does it ever come up?
I sort of, in the why some people are atheists, kind of briefly mentioned it. And I say it's not really clear whether they do have the intuition that some things are morally wrong, but they're kind of rationalizing away. Maybe it's an act of self-deception, or maybe they just don't have that perception of moral wrongness at all. It's kind of hard to say, because one of the things that we that people have to be careful about it is like what I call the mind reading fallacy, which is arriving at a belief about what a person is thinking based on insufficient evidence. And I'm not sure if we have sufficient evidence to determine either way whether they actually have this position, but they're deceiving themselves, or maybe they
Right, but how do
something's
they
wrong.
talk about it in terms of their argument? Like everybody knows that you do have a conscience, right? Even atheists.
Not everybody. I mean, there are some atheists who don't seem to think that morality in the normal sense of the term, the moral ought that isn't purely descriptive. Some people think that they don't have that perception, that this perception doesn't exist for them, that sort of conscience doesn't exist for them. Now, they might have strong inclinations about what to do. They may very much dislike the idea of torture and be strongly in favor of it being outlawed and so forth. But if they were to be consistent with their views, they'd have to admit that it's just a matter of case. There's nothing really wrong with it. But even then, you kind of can't help but wonder. But on some level, it seems as if they really do know that it's wrong, even if they're not aware that they know it. It kind of seems that's what's going on.
Well, but that's the part where a lot of these conversations get bogged down, because you can't flat out say, look, that it's wrong, unless somebody owns that sort of, to people talking about it normally, it's self-evident to some degree. It's axiomatic, but it's only axiomatic if the other person thinks it's axiomatic too, by definition. So you get bogged down into it, and they can make a mush of a conversation and never really acknowledge what seems to be obvious, right?
Yeah, that does happen sometimes.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what you're saying, is that there is such a thing as a conscience, and almost everybody prior to like 50 years ago, everybody would say for sure that you have one. Now some people try and rationalize that out of existence, or say that you don't.
So I'm optimistically assuming that most people, even most atheists, would recognize that there's something morally wrong with torturing infants just for fun. Because you have to remember that Twitter, for example, is not real life. And I think most atheists are just like casual people. They just believe there's no God. They don't really just debate this on the internet or anywhere else. It just happens to be a belief they have. I think maybe some of these atheists, these sort of casual person on the street atheists that doesn't really talk about it much, they just accept what seems reasonable to them, if pressed, might actually abandon their atheism if they recognize that if atheism is true, then nothing is morally wrong. William Lane Craig remarked that for him, one of the most effective arguments he's seen for atheism is the moral argument. I expect because of that reason, because a lot of people who are non-theists do have that belief that that the moral realm is real, that it's objectively real, that, for example, homophobic bigotry isn't just a matter of opinion of it being wrong. It's actually objectively wrong, independent of people's opinions of it.
Right. Independent of whether the culture teaches you it's right or wrong too. Independent of whatever the culture dictates is irrelevant to the intrinsic wrongness of it. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. If you really want to have some fun, especially if you have like a left-leaning liberal who doesn't acknowledge moral objectivism, what you could bring up this example. What about like a fundamentalist Christian who torturing a lesbian just because of her sexual orientation? Is that wrong? Would it remain wrong if this fundamentalist who thought it was good to torture lesbians thought otherwise and killed or brainwashed everyone who disagreed with him, so that even the lesbian thinks she deserves to be tortured just because of her sexual orientation? Wouldn't that homophobic bigotry still be wrong? And if they bite the bullet and say, no, it wouldn't be morally wrong, you can say, well, I, as a Christian, believe that this homophobic bigotry is morally wrong, but you disagree?
It's
a very interesting circumstance.
What happens when you brought that up? Did anybody ever bite the bullet?
I've never done that. I think the closest I've come to that was a different example where a person said, oh, I don't believe in moral objectivism. Okay. Do you believe that torturing infants just for fun is morally wrong? It's like, yes, I do. Would it remain wrong if a baby torturer thought otherwise and killed everyone who disagreed with him? And she was just silent from what I'm thinking there, because I think she was the gears in her head were turning and realized what that implied. Because if she said yes, if that was morally wrong, in that situation where all human opinion said otherwise, she would have to accept moral objectivism. And she never actually got around to answering that question.
See, that's how it always works. They duck out just when it gets good.
Yeah, but that's like, moral objective is actually relatively easy to kind of demonstrate. All you have to do is just give one good example of an objective moral truth, like torturing an infant just for fun, or homophobic bigotry, like torturing a lesbian just for sexual orientation. Things that people would ordinarily, most sane people would accept as clearly that's not morally wrong in that circumstance. And yeah, relatively easy. They might give lip service to relativism, but a lot of people who would do so, I think, would quickly abandon it once they're given one good example like that.
Well, the classic question that actually Dillahunty brought up in his Jordan Peterson debate. Did you catch that? Did you catch that one? Jordan Peterson versus Matt Dillahunty?
Oh, I don't think I did. I wasn't aware that Matt Dillahunty and Jordan Peterson, they debated each other directly. Yes,
it was more of a conversation, but it
Okay.
had some of a debate-like structure.
No, I don't think I caught that.
Stage. It's not Peterson's strongest moment, but it's definitely worth watching. One of the things that Matt Dillahunty brought up is the classic from Dostoevsky: if God doesn't exist, all is permitted. And he seems to think he brought it up with a slam dunk refutation of that idea. Like that's just an easy idea to debunk and dismiss.
So quick correction there. I don't think Dostoevsky said that. I think it was like, without an afterlife, all things were permitted. And that was one of his characters in Brothers Karamazov. But go ahead.
No, I'm pretty sure that the quote is actually, if God does not exist, all is permitted. Or
you know what? I fact checked this because I was wondering if that's true. A lot of these quotes that we think are attributed to somebody turned out not to be true, and that was one of them. But
is it really? Who said it? Alyosha in Brothers Karamazov?
So the Karamazov, there was a similar thing that happened in this quote, but it was more like, oh, if only we had access to the internet.
And we do. And we do. I'm guessing Alyosha, even though it doesn't quite make sense, but Alyosha is the atheist in the Brothers Karamazov. And there's a lot of, what was interesting is that a lot of people thought Dostoevsky was an atheist because he gives Alyosha so many of the good arguments in the book. Go ahead.
So here's what it was. I have an article on that right before me. Although the statement, if there is no God, everything is permitted, is widely attributed to Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, Sartre was the first to do so, and being a nothingness, he simply never said it. The closest one gets this infamous aphorism are a handful of approximations, like Dimitri's claim with a debate with Ratkin, but what will become of men then? I said, without God and immortal life, all things are permitted then. They can do what they like. So that was the actual quote. So it's close.
Wait, what was the closest one? Something from the...
But what will become of men then? I asked him. Without God and immortal life, all things are permitted then. They can do what they like.
Oh, that's pretty close.
Yeah, it was close, but not quite there.
Who said
that? That was in Brothers Karamazov. It was Dimitri's claim with his debate with Ratkin, as he reports to Alyosha, something like that.
Yeah, Alyosha is the atheist in Brothers Karamazov, and there's the good Christian guy. I forget his name. Did you read that? It's a really good book. It's been assigned to IC. We assigned it to Inspiring Christianity. We assigned that, and what else did we assign you? IC. We assigned Crime and Punishment in that book, and he's on it. He'll read it by the
I started that, but unfortunately I never finished it.
Oh, it's killer. It's one of the few of the classics that those two are the two of the classics that I read. Couldn't put down, actually.
I should go back and finish it. There's some classics that are like, some classics I didn't like that much. That was sort of halfway for me. It was sort of a little bit too slow moving for me to really enjoy it. But I recognize it was good writing.
That's a total moment when you've heard about something for years as this is the ultimate classic movie or the classic book, and then you start reading it and you're like, hey, this is just as good as everybody says it is, and you really totally love it. That happened to me with both the Dostoevskys. And
for me, it was Sherlock Holmes. I really like reading Sherlock Holmes.
Oh wow, I've never read any of the Sherlock Holmes books.
That was like a really fun thing. You know what the weird thing about Sherlock Holmes is that I've never seen Sherlock Holmes, that character, in like a movie and a TV show. I've seen somebody with the same name as Sherlock Holmes in like TV series.
Right, really because the book is so different from like how he's portrayed.
Like in Benedict Cumberbatch, his personality is completely different from the Sherlock Holmes of the stories. The Elementary it doesn't quite the same personality. Sherlock Holmes and Robert Downey Jr. doesn't still quite have that same personality. I've never actually seen Sherlock Holmes's actual personality portrayed anywhere
Does
very
he actually
faithfully.
say "elementary, my dear Watson," or is that just like,
No?
Yeah,
He comes in the ballpark. He doesn't say that exact phrase. It's kind of like the phrase "beam me up, Scotty." That never was in the original series.
That's not in the original series? You're kidding?
No, not that exact phrase.
"Beam me up, Scotty" is not in the. Oh my God, that's like groundbreaking, dude.
Yeah, just another one is for Star Wars. People say, "Luke, I'm your father," and that exact phrase is not in any of the Star Wars original series trilogy either. Sort of in the ballpark, but not quite there.
Right. Actually, "Play It Again, Sam," I think is not in the original.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like something similar. It's like,
"Play it, Sam, play it again," or something like that.
Yeah, "Play it, Sam, play that song," or something. Yeah, it's similar, but it's not exactly "Play It Again, Sam." And then the one classic on the movies, Casablanca, is definitely one that you watch and you're like, wow, this is every bit as good as anybody has ever said it was. And The Godfather. The Godfather, I was like, wow.
Godfather's good. Another good classic, I think, was Judgment at Nuremberg.
Not overrated. That just as good.
That was excellent. I was like, wow, this really does deserve to be called a classic. It was some of that what he read. Ernst Janning, I think his name was, when he's on the stand, and he describes how people could actually come into this Nazi Germany stuff. It's like, how did a civilized nation? And when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, I can really understand his point of view. I can understand how people could fall for this.
Yeah, that's definitely clever. I haven't seen that one in years. I haven't seen that one in a long time. Also, The Maltese Falcon is another one like that, which you might not have seen.
We should probably not get too far. I think we've gotten too far off track, though.
Yeah, that usually happens on my channel. We start chatting about movies.
Okay.
Right, we can bring it back. So what?
You cut out there, unfortunately.
To think that he can easily deal with. The reason why the quote is famous isn't necessarily because he said it. It's because the idea resonates with people as, an importantly obvious idea. Matt seems to think that he can just dismiss it out of hand. What do you think about something like that? That's how we got sidetracked.
I guess it depends how he dismissed it. How did he dismiss it exactly?
I don't actually remember offhand. Let me see if someone in the comments is talking about it. I don't remember. It was Tom Jump in his debate with Ask Yourself. Sorry for breaking it to him, Maverick Christian. I don't no idea what that means. Tom Jump, does that mean anything to you? Tom Jump with his debate, Ask Yourself?
I think I saw one of his debates with Ask Yourself.
I'm not sure who Ask Yourself is. Is that a good Christian debater?
I can't remember. I remember him saying be at least competent.
I don't remember. I'm not sure who that is. I don't think I've ever seen him. So I'm not sure. So yeah, definitely check out Matt Dillahunty debates, Jordan Peterson. The really good debates with Jordan Peterson are the Jordan Peterson Sam Harris debates. There's I think 2 or 3 of them. I have Vancouver, and those are the best. Have you seen those?
I think I've heard of one where he took 2 hours to find truth or something like that.
No. That's one from Sam Harris's podcast. That one's torture. Oh my God, that one's like hell on earth. They get into this really weird conversation about truth, and Jordan Peterson's kind of trying to define in pragmatic ways, and oh man, and it goes on for like an hour. I swear to God, you want to kill yourself by the end of it.
I remember. I don't know if you see Freedom Tunes. Freedom Tunes kind of poked fun about that.
Who did?
Jordan? Yeah, and it's like, well, it depends on what you mean by truth, Sam. Sam's like, oh, not this again.
Yeah. Totally, that's exactly what it was. He does one thing like that in the Sam Harris debate, where they're like, do you believe in God? And he does that. Well, it depends on what you mean by God. And then he does it.
He never answers the question. I was so irritated with him like that. I like some of the things Jordan Peterson does, but I was really annoyed when he seemed to dodge the question.
I don't know if he's dodging it or if before I was a Christian, I was almost exactly in the same place when it came to God belief. It's like sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. I kind of leaned toward Christianity or religion, not Christianity. But depending on the mood I was in, I would have given you a different answer different days of the week. And all of them would have been honest answers. You know, hungover, I would say no. You know, I was in a really happy mood and watched like It's a Wonderful Life. I would have said, yeah, I do believe in God. Yeah. So it really depended. That's how I see it as kind of honest, not necessarily dodging, but I don't know. What do you think?
It struck me that he was dodging the question, that his real answer is, I don't believe in a literal personal God, but he wasn't really answering it. He could have just got like a straight answer and he wasn't really doing it. He seemed to be dodging the question to me.
I mean, it could have been. I always took it as like, that's exactly what, that he was trying to be more true to where he's really at rather than dodging. Because sometimes that's, for certain people, do you believe in God is actually a weirder question, just straightforward. For me, it's straightforward. And for an atheist, it's straightforward. But for a lot of the nons, and when I was a non, it wasn't a straightforward question. You know, it was like, sometimes I think in like a vague energy source life thing, sometimes, and sometimes I don't. You know, I don't know. Do you never were in that camp?
No, not really.
All right. Well, I definitely was. Hey, Anthony, Anthony Martin Bosco's in the chat. You're invited to come on here and have an interview. You know, if you're interested, let me know. I'll give you some times. So we've been talking for how long? Have we been talking for? Should we ask questions?
About an hour and a half or something. Yeah, go ahead, ask questions.
Anybody have questions for my friend here? By the way, are you interested in coming back and joining like chats and stuff and streaming? How much free time do you have these days?
Not a whole lot. I mean, maybe after December 6th, and from that I'll have a little bit of time. I'm still in school right now. I have a philosophy paper to work on. And I'm gonna cool. There's that, and I kind of want to work on the next blog post. Have you heard of the Eternal Society Paradox?
No.
Okay. I'm doing a blog post on that with some symbolic logic stuff. The Eternal Society Paradox basically goes like this.
Did you disappear?
If imagine a society that has the abilities of ordinary human beings in each year of its existence, existed throughout eternity past, for a beginningless infinite past. And it has this tradition. It flips a coin. If the coin comes up heads, then they do a particular chant, but only if they've never done the chant before. If it does not come up heads, they don't do for the chant that year. In the first scenario, it comes up heads for the first time last year, and they all get together to do the chant. Simple, right? It seems like this would be possible if an infinite past were possible. But this scenario was not actually possible. The reason why is because the coin flips are probabilistically independent of events. If that were possible, then it would have also been possible for the coin to come up heads infinitely many times, like each year of the infinite past. So now remember, the tradition is that if it comes up heads, they all get together to do the chant, but only if they've never done the chant before. In this situation where the coin comes up heads each year, do they ever get together to do the chant?
I dropped out for part of it. Is this a question of me?
Yes.
What's the answer supposed to be? Because I couldn't hear all of it.
Okay, so they had to have done the chant sometime because they flipped the coin. It came up heads last year, and they do the chant that they'd never done it before. So they had to have done the chant sometime. And yet there is no year they could have done the chant. And here you point to, there is a prior year in which they would have done the chant had they never done the chant before. It's inspired from something called the Grim Reaper paradox. And the answer result is that this results in a logical contradiction. So I was invited to be in an interview with Classical Peterson podcast where I talked about it. And I thought it was interesting. I think you're typing something because I can hear keyboard sounds.
Oh, wow. No, that's just static. All right.
Okay.
I don't know. It's gone?
All right. Yeah. Well, sort of.
No, it's
sounds
not.
like keyboard typing, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Yeah, so that's I was working on some symbolic logic on that. That's one of my projects. But I was interviewed with that. And I thought that was kind of an interesting paradox because surely there's something metaphysically suspicious about an infinite past of an eternal society with the abilities of ordinary humans can generate a logical contradiction. But some people were questioning some parts of the premises. One person actually questioned whether that second scenario really did result in a logical contradiction. So I was putting together some symbolic logic stuff to work on that. Anyway, I don't know that much free point.
That's not the paper. You did that on a channel?
You were on. What's not the paper?
I thought you mentioned a paper and then you started telling about this, but I thought it was in relationship to the paper, like you were writing the paper on this.
Oh, I was working on a blog article on the Eternal Society paradox, the symbolic logic stuff. So, because some people I interact with online actually question certain things that I thought were obvious, like if scenario S1 is possible, then scenario S2 are possible. So I wrote an article on that on my blog. And then one person some people recently questioned, like, I don't think that second scenario where the coin comes up heads each year is self-contradictory. So I was working on some symbolic logic to more rigorously demonstrate that that's self-contradictory, and some more symbolic logic stuff I was working on. So,
I got you.
Long story short, there's a lot of stuff that's on my plate right now. So maybe after December 6th, I'll have more free time available, though.
Yeah, all right. Well, if we have, because we have stream, I'm going to start having streams on the channel. And, you might be interested to pop by and fill us in on the world of logic. Santi, do you have any questions for my man here? Doesn't look like it. Let's see. So it's been 1 hour, 45 minutes, and somewhat of impromptu. I guess we got the chimes wrong. What was the thing?
That was my fault. I added 2 hours in the wrong direction. I should not have relied on my memory about which direction it was in. Totally my fault.
That used to happen a lot with people when I first started streaming, that we would just get the times wrong, and I haven't double checked with people in a long time because it hasn't happened in a long time. But it's just as well because it was just as easy to do it now. I thought the StreamYard was going to cut out on me, but it seems to have somewhat survived. There was some parts where it was floating in and out. So there you have it. You want to wrap it up and tell us whatever you want to say about yourself, and then we'll call it a day.
All right. I have the Maverick Christian YouTube channel. If anybody wants to subscribe there, I have a Patreon account. If anybody wants to support my channel and help fund my college education, because college, as it turns out, is not very inexpensive. And yes, go in peace.
Before you go, is there a good objection to the Grim Reaper paradox? Santi is asking. He's got a good channel, Finding Truth, it's called.
Well, the Grim Reaper paradox itself is explicitly self-contradictory. There's no good objection against the self-contradictory nature of the paradox. You can kind of come up with relatively decent objections against applying the Grim Reaper paradox to an infinite past. So there's where I think you could say it's like, okay, maybe you can't have infinitely divisible time, but then there's ways to get around that, like the Grim Messenger paradox. And then maybe you could say, well, maybe it's just not possible to have an infinite series of Grim Messengers. Maybe there's because the contradiction, there's a lot of elements that go into making the contradiction. And one of them messengers check, okay, well, the reason why it's impossible is that causal finitism is true. You can't have a backward series of infinite events. But you could object to another element saying, well, maybe what's really impossible is this part of the scenario right here. And that's a relatively decent objection you can make. But you can come up with all these sorts of paradoxes and contradictions that result from an infinite backward series of events that one could just say, I think the best explanation is just causal finitism, that you can't have a backward series of causal events. But yeah, that's the way out of it. You could just say, it's this element or that element or that element. So in the Eternal Society paradox thing, for example, you could say, well, you can't have an eternal society with the abilities of ordinary humans in each series of existence. That's what's really impossible. And of course, my response to that seems really ad hoc. It seems like there has to be something wrong with an infinite past if all that takes to generate contradiction is an eternal society with the abilities of ordinary human beings in each existence. It seems like that shouldn't happen if an infinite past were possible, but people's intuitive perceptions can vary.
Well, I forget if this was in your conversation with Pine Creek about intuitive perceptions. Did that come up when you were talking to Pine Creek?
Yeah, it did. I kind of brought up that sometimes, in fact, what the video that he responded to, one of the things I brought up is that sometimes people have differing intuitive perceptions. That's part of the reason why some people are atheists.
Well, and also sometimes some intuitive perceptions are really, really they seem obvious to you, but they're totally counterintuitive. So for example, if this were 1850 and you look at your table, The idea that your table is in motion with, particles, we know that because of science. But there's no way anybody would ever believe that back then. It just doesn't, it's totally counterintuitive, that there are particles in motion in like a coffee table. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes what seems obvious can be completely wrong for reasons you don't know. Does that make sense, how I just said it?
Yeah, kind of. I don't remember when the idea that atomic theory really started getting in its. Yeah, I'm a bit rusty on my history of science.
Right, but I'm just saying to like the average person, if this
at least like in the 11th century, the idea that their particles would be moving, I think would be struck as very counterintuitive to a lot of people. The only reason we know about that, of course, is because of science. And even with science, you're relying on your intuitive perceptions that, for example, your sense experiences are reliable and so forth.
Right. Well, in general, it's a good bet that your basic sensory perceptions are interpreting the world for the most part as it's actually occurring. That's a reasonable bet. But there are some things that you would infer where it's not a given, but where you could be just totally wildly off the mark because some things are totally counterintuitive for reasons you don't know. That's the only reason I brought it up. Like there's just no way you'd ever believe somebody if they told you there was like particles in motion in a chair. It just doesn't make any sense to you until the science came along to prove that it's true.
Or like the Earth moving, like we can't feel it move, but yet it's rotating around the sun at quite a remarkable velocity.
Right, and when I brought that up in the chat, I brought up what I just said in the chat. Somebody actually said the idea that we're that the sun isn't rotating around the Earth is counterintuitive. Like that's a normal thing you'd think, just by how it looks. You need something more than just what you infer from to piece some of this stuff together accurately. That's the only point that I was making. You would say yes, maybe no.
Yeah,
definitely. Yes. Okay. So that relates in general to a lot of the stuff we talk about. So we will now wrap it all up in a nice, pretty little package. Thank you for coming on the channel. Any last thoughts you want to impart to the audience?
Just my tagline at the end, I guess. Go in peace, serve the Lord, and love logic.
The mass is ended. Go in peace. That's my usual tagline on my videos. And love logic. That's what we're adding to it. Love logic, little boys and girls. Love logic, kids. And with that, we will adieu.